Hi, I'm Carol Peruso, and I'm the Journalism and Public Relations Librarian. I want to give you a little bit of background about myself before we get started today with our research session. I have about 20 years of journalism experience in the newsroom, print and online, and I also spent about 10 years on the digital publishing side of the business, and then went to graduate school and became a journalism librarian. So that's a little bit about my background. Let me start out with just a little bit of introduction to the library website and the kinds of resources that you can find there. The library homepage has many doors into our information. What we're going to be spending time today on, however, is just this one door right here, Research Guides. And this is good for any class that you're taking. There's a research guide for every department on campus. And so if you just scroll down to the department that you're looking for, in this case we're going to go down to Journalism and Public Relations, and I'll click on this again, and this will take me to the Journalism Research Guide homepage, which in truth is just news updates. These are RSS feeds from lots and lots of publications: the New York Times, Fox World News, BBC, Al Jazeera, Wall Street Journal. Placed for one-stop place for you to keep up with the news. And then beyond that, we have pages that are dedicated to specific courses and to specific types of research. And in a moment, we'll get started on the research for this class. Okay, let's start by clicking on the Journalism 311 tab. And the first thing that I want to show you here is that the AP Style Book, which is the standard that most publications use, we have it online and it's right here. So any time of the day or night you have the Style Book available to you. We're going to be talking about three different types of research today: background research, finding people to interview, experts to interview, and finding government statistics. We're going to start with background research. There are different types of background research, but the most common is what we used to call checking the clips. To some extent, it's still called that. This means reading previously published stories or broadcast transcripts related to the story you're working on. That research might be limited to the news organization you are working for, but it also, and more commonly, especially at smaller organizations, it will include reviewing the coverage of your topic from competitors and major newspapers. Well, how do we do that? It depends on your organization. It might have an extensive database of news, such as LexisNexis. It may have a database just of its own publications or coverage, or it might not even have that, and you might be searching Google or going to your public or a university library. How much research you will need to do depends on the complexity of your story and the deadline, and how much has already been published on the topic. Okay, let's start with the database Global News Stream. This database has hundreds of newspapers from all over the world. It also has some magazines, some blogs, a variety of different types of news sources, but the vast majority of what's in this database is newspapers. This is generally not the database that big newsrooms will use. They will typically use LexisNexis, but this is the database, a very similar database that we have here at Cal State Long Beach. So when you're working off-site, you will have to log in. That's true of all the library resources that you'll be using remotely. I was already logged in, so I didn't have to put my ID in and my Beach ID and my password. So it's a very straightforward type of database. We're going to start with a search, believe it or not, for COVID. Surprise, surprise. And today we don't even have to do COVID-19. And we're going to look for infants. So we can see what type of stories have been done about COVID and infants. You might get a pop-up list of suggestions. I suggest you make up your own rather than use the pop-up list, because often those are done by people who make typographical errors. The other thing you could do is you could eliminate the S and put an asterisk in there. And what that will do is it will give you infant, infantile, infants. Okay, let's hit search. And we get 16,532 results. Far more stories than any reporter is going to read at any time. So how do we filter this? Okay, well, the first thing we can do is we can filter it by date. Well, you know what? Guess what? That's not going to remove very many because most of the COVID stories have been done in the last 3 months. We can also look at trade journals. We can look at magazines. We can look at newspapers, blogs, podcasts, websites, audio and video works, but the vast majority of the stories for the moment are in newspapers. We also can sort by publication title, and this is something that one would normally use, especially if you're at a small organization that doesn't have something like LexisNexis. So the way you do this is you just click More, and then you check the ones you want to include and the ones you don't want to include. Typically, these news services are ones that you're not going to include. You're probably going to be looking for the major publications, such as the New York Times Online. Depending on your audience, you might look for one of the Spanish language papers. You might be looking for things that have been published in college newspapers. The Washington Post. Again, the New York Times, because that's more than just the online. And you can see these are papers all over the world. We might want USA Today. We might want The Guardian. And I'm looking for the Los Angeles Times. We might want the Wall Street Journal if it's in here. I mean, the paper is in here. I'm not sure if they have any stories on infants with COVID. And then you just apply the filters. And now we've moved from 16,000 results down to 658. A lot still, but a far more manageable number. We might also want to go down here to subject to find stories that are about these various topics, not that just mention it. Just about every story today mentions it. So we want COVID-19. Let's see if we have anything relative children and youth. We would probably want that. Pediatrics, we might want that. We might want fatalities. There may be a number that we want. That isn't going to reduce things a great deal. And now, frankly, it's a matter of skimming through the results. And these are listed in the order of relevance to your terms. So you could also switch it to most recent first. This particular story was April 28th. Often right now we are very hungry for the most recent stories. So here's one. 2 Midwestern cities. I'm not sure where infant comes into play there. Infant toddler centers. Infant daughter. So there's any one number of stories here. Now you could also increase the precision of your search. We'll click on Modify Search, and we'll add a row, and we'll say symptoms or symptom. Now that's before we limit the search to the various publications. That is not a sticky filter. So we've got the New York Times, the Guardian, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, you might want CNN, and the Los Angeles Times. Let's try that. And that takes us down to 275. So now if we look here, we're seeing a little bit more that's relevant to specifically to kids. And it's still filtered at the most recent first. We could change that to relevance. And this is going to be articles that are more relevant to your terms, perhaps, but not necessarily the newest. And you can see here that there is some duplication as well, because we've included the Wall Street Journal online and the Wall Street Journal not online. So you're still going to get, there's much duplication here, which I'm not quite certain why there is this much duplication. But that gives us a start on finding stories in the clips.